Hello and welcome to another episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Travis was just down at the LA Auto Show and I dropped in and out of some of the events down there. So we're going to talk about the LA Auto Show, what's new there, Honda's new Prelude, the Telluride. We're going to be deep diving into Stellantis and answering some questions about EVs in the blistering sun of the Arizona desert. So Travis, and to everybody out there watching and listening, if you hear any random weird noises or see anything strange on screen, it's because, I'm babysitting my daughter here because, unfortunately, the lovely lady that has been helping us out here during the day sometimes, she's having pregnancy complications of her own. So hopefully everything is going well for her. And if you hear any random squeaking or moaning, I promise it is actually a 5-month-old just hanging out here in the corner.
It is the baby. Yeah. My special guest is just a drink, non-alcoholic. It's too early in the morning for that, but mine should be a little bit quieter.
Yeah, so let's talk about the LA Auto Show because you were there and I went down and saw some things before you got there, so we can compare our notes about what we both saw.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there these days. I mean, the range of vehicles, I don't know if it's getting bigger, but it just seems huge at this point. Even just wandering over towards Stellantis, they've got quite a few brands under that umbrella, and anything from that the new Charger, we'll say the Charger 6-pack, to the Fiat 500e, you go, man, there's a lot of stuff happening out here.
Yeah, including the new Jeep Recons. We should probably talk about that for a bit because this is the Jeep's EV strategy. Well, the entire portfolio's EV strategy is mind-blowing to begin with, but this specific EV strategy is bonkers because Jeep now has 2 EVs and none of the other brands other than Fiat has a single one. And Fiat has what I think is probably the worst electric value in America, the 500e. It would be
cute.
It's cute. It's fantastic in a vacuum, but if it was if it was $15,000, I'd be like, "Oh my god, yes, bring them all
Everyone
on."
should drive one. Yeah.
But it is not. It is significantly more expensive than that. And then we've got the Charger, the American muscle car, which I agree there should be an electric variant because that's the future theoretically, right? But it should have come after the gasoline ones and after the other ones. And then, hey, there's an electric one, rather than the bad press that they got by saying, hey, it's going to be all electric. Oh, sorry, my bad. The gasoline one is actually coming, which we all knew was coming because we all saw the spy shots and everything. It was well known, right? And then we got Wagoneer S, which have you driven Wagoneer S? Yes, you did. Right, because we were at their launch together. That has to be the most infuriatingly underbaked EV I've ever driven because it's so close, and they could fix it pretty easily, but I don't think it should ever be a Jeep. I think that could have been a Chrysler.
Chrysler, I think, would be a great spot because it's not like they don't have room for more product in the lineup right now, and not like it wouldn't have fit either. I will have to say it's one of the most under-tired vehicles I've driven in a long time as well. Indeed. I mean, it's hilariously so. If Jeep and Stellantis are about having fun driving experiences, that one is uniquely fun, but not in the best way, just sort of a interesting way.
But they finally fixed it because now we're getting the Recon, which is the one they should have just started with to begin with.
And it's existed other places. We're like last on the list, which is
crazy. No, that's the Avenger.
You're right.
Yeah, because they've got other. Yeah, they've got other electric Jeeps in Europe that were not designed for America. This is part of the whole problem that confuses some Americans that are like, why is Jeep building cars wherever? And they get riled up. This American car company shouldn't be moving production to somewhere else. And it's like, well, we'll back up your train, guys. Remember, Jeep sells strangely well in Italy and a number of countries in Europe, but they don't buy all the same Jeeps we buy, including a model that was not designed for us. So why would they build that here? They build it over there because it's for over there. At any rate, this Recon is theoretically the one for us, but it is baffling in an entirely different way because we're now going to basically have 4 Jeeps that are within five almost, that are within spitting distance of one another in terms of size. We have Grand Cherokee, we have Wagoneer S, we have Recon, we have the new Cherokee, and we have the 4-door Wrangler that are all suspiciously similar in size. But Recon is the EV that makes sense because it is this cross between Grand Cherokee and Wrangler, only electric, and they're
Mhm.
promising it can do Jeep things.
Yeah, I mean, I would put it more like a Bronco than I would like a Jeep Wrangler. It feels like it has the off-road pedigree and everything's there, but it's a little bit more put together, I guess.
Yeah,
A little bit
maybe.
more of a complete
But that's
structured
the that's
vehicle.
the Grand Cherokee component there.
Right, right. But there's one thing missing, and this one I think is really, really important. I don't have any problem with the pricing. It was going to be pretty expensive from the jump. I love that the doors come off. I don't mind that the windshield doesn't. The open roof concept, fantastic. The thing that's missing is range, which is really important if you're going to do a lot of driving farther
Mhm.
away from chargers, which is in theory where this would end up, because it is by all looks a pretty off-road capable vehicle, not a Wrangler Rubicon, but still something you could
Mhm.
take off the beaten path, and you just can't take it too far.
And this is the thing that everybody needs to understand with EVs. There is a reason that the range is low, and that's because it's trying to be an off-road EV.
Hmm.
And we can see it highlighted in Wrangler, or sorry, Wagoneer S and Recon, because they're basically the same vehicle. They
Hmm.
share the electric motors, they share the battery, they share the platform, they share an insane amount actually with one another. But one gets over 300 miles of real world range, and the other one they're saying is going to be right around 200, 230, and
Yeah.
maybe later there'll be something at 250. But the reason is it's upright, it's boxy. Importantly, it has over 9 inches of ground clearance. That's a really big problem for aero and for range. A lot of people don't really realize that ground clearance itself is a problem. When the car is really hugging the road, you get a lot less turbulence underneath the vehicle and a lot better aerodynamic profile on the highway. So that highway range figure is not going to be great on the Recon because of its height. It's also a tiny bit heavier here and there because of some of the changes that they made, unless you take the doors
Mhm.
off, of course. And then it's got a full size spare tire on the back. So all of these things add up to the loss in range. But that's exactly what we see in Rivian's lineup, for instance, et cetera. If you look at an
Yep.
R1S and you have the big knobbly off-road tires on it and you actually jack it up that high, your range isn't going to be great. And the Recon is trying to be the quote unquote more affordable model. It is priced within the range of Wrangler and Grand Cherokee, which I think is fine. I think that the
Mhm.
Wagoneer S comes across as too expensive because it's too much like a lower end Grand Cherokee or a mid level Grand Cherokee. But this, with the off road capability and trying to be something slightly different, a Wrangler Sahara, though, is still going to be about 10 grand less. And it's not Rubicon level of capability, which I think is why they decided to call it a Moab, not a Rubicon.
Right, it went a different direction, and I do think this thing will be good at crawling, so a place like Moab with the obstacles that are there, is probably a better fit. You're not gonna do a lot of high-speed dune crushing like you get in the Sahara, because that's just not the
Hmm.
well, it's just not the vibe. You're also not gonna do a ton of serious rock crawling like you would in a Rubicon, so yeah, mix it up, go a different direction, and I think it's gonna be great for most people who are interested. If you like your Jeep and you have an off-road Jeep, a truly dedicated off-road Jeep, go ahead and get a Recon, and that's gonna be your around town. It still has the total Jeep vibe, and, honestly, I'm excited to drive one, and I think the open air, open top experience is one that we just haven't really
Hmm.
had much in the world of EVs. I shot a video for our EV channel and I referenced the Hummer EV, which can also go open roof, but boy, is that a different experience.
Yeah, and its doors don't come off. And in
Right.
the Recon, all the doors, well, the rear hatch doesn't come off, but the four doors come off, and every piece of glass except the windscreen comes off the vehicle or slides in some way. So it has a panoramic
Mm.
sunroof standard. You can get the canvas roof, which is very much like the canvas roof in the Wrangler. That I think is the coolest option in that segment. Um, but what who is going to go off-roading in a 230-mile range EV? By the time you get to the back of Beyond, you don't have any range to explore anything beyond, right? So
Right.
it is that same problem with the original Solterra with about 200 miles of range. Like,
Mhm.
it'll get you down that trail, but it won't really get you much off the off-road trail and then still be able to get you back home unless we see more trail charging, which Rivian is trying to do some trail charging, but that network is not well deployed. It's not a lot there yet.
Yeah, and even then, it's more trailhead for hiking, not trailhead for driving. You know, it there even higher performance vehicles, like you have your Porsche Taycans and your Ioniq 5Ns that are like, hey, we could do track time. Well, they're having difficulty getting chargers put in at tracks for that
Mhm.
application. Imagine the challenge you'll find when it's further away from
Yeah.
civilization. So
But at
I think
least
it's a
tracks
cool product,
yeah,
but
at least a decent number of tracks do have EV chargers, and it's gonna be easier to integrate there than the middle of nowhere. I
yeah.
am also intrigued that it has a rear locker, but it doesn't have a front locker. It's depending entirely on traction control for that. But otherwise, the specs look decent. I mean, it's high horsepower, over 600 horsepower. It's got a lot of
Mhm.
torque there. It has a lower final drive ratio in the back. It's got a pretty big battery as well. And the
Mhm.
charging speeds are pretty respectable, very Tesla-like. It's not earth-shattering, but they've solidly hit Tesla charge rates.
Yeah, I'm curious to see who buys it? People will
Mhm.
buy it. I think it's a fantastically cool thing, and again, it's an EV experience you don't really have. We don't even really have any drop top EV, convertible options out there. Some plug-in hybrid versions, but not a
Mhm.
lot where you can get this open air experience. People love their Jeeps, they love their Wranglers, and they don't necessarily take them off road ever. They just like what it is. So it's not like they won't sell any because it's not off road capable.
Yeah. The next one that was interesting to me was that Telluride, we saw Telluride, of course, a few weeks ago, but Kia's
Mhm.
Telluride, we now know the engine lineup, and they went in a different direction than Hyundai did. So Hyundai developed a brand new 3.5-liter V6 that's going in Palisade. But instead of snagging the parts from the parts bin for Telluride, they took the hybrid system. So it'll be the same 329 horsepower hybrid system that you drove recently, but the non-hybrid drivetrain is not going to be the 3.5-liter V6. It's going to be the 2.5-liter turbo, which I was really surprised by. I'm unclear why they decided to do two different engines in these very closely related SUVs.
Yeah, and I didn't check our specs in advance here, but I imagine that the total output is pretty similar between the V6 and that 2.5 turbo. So it's more of a personality thing than anything.
Yeah, it's a
And
trade
it
for horsepower and torque. So the V6 produces
yeah,
more horsepower but less torque. The 2.5-liter turbo, I'm gonna guess, is probably going to be slightly quicker 0 to 60, but the Palisade regular V6 is a little on the slow side, so it's not a terribly high bar.
yeah, it's we're not setting any new records by beating the Palisade V6. It also could be a little bit more efficient, but if you want efficiency, get the hybrid in either of them. So I'm
Mhm.
just curious if it's more of a personality thing, and at that point, what's that personality differentiator? We just said that the Palisade is slow, but it's not an
It's not a
unwieldy cruiser. It's not
yeah,
unpleasant to ride around in, and that V6
it's
doesn't have to work very hard because it's pretty powerful to begin
right.
with. So
It's
it might
not
be
the
a little more pleasant
1980s it's not the
overall.
1980s diesel Oldsmobile I learned how to drive in that did 0 to
Right,
60 in 27,
maybe.
28 seconds, something like that. So eventually, right?
Mhm.
It's not as slow as the hybrid Fiat 500e in Europe, apparently, which has only 60 something horsepower. And those
Oh
0 to
my
60 numbers are out. It's well over 20 seconds, which is why we are
yeah.
never getting that in America.
That one that's when we start to talk about dangerous, and that feels dangerous.
I completely reject the dangerous argument. I've heard that over and over again.
Yeah,
Here's the deal. When you really talk to safety experts, their commentary is there is no possibility anybody is ever going to accelerate out of an accident. And I hate to tell people that
sure.
because they will try and claim they can in their AMGs and their M's and their whatever. It's no, you can't. It- all decisions are going to be so short in nature that the amount of time required to downshift and accelerate whatever any meaningful way, it's not really going to be possible. Maybe there's some fringe 1,000th of a percent time, maybe where that would work. Your brakes
Yeah,
are your best bet because all cars will stop at around 130 feet or less. Performance ones are around 100 feet. So that is always going to be your best option is use your brake pedal. And the other thing is for merging onto the freeway, you can make better decisions. I know I sure had to in a diesel Cutlass Sierra that could barely get out of its own way. I mean, I could have, my bicycle probably accelerated faster downhill than it did.
yeah.
And you just learn an entirely different way of driving when you have
I
a slow car.
You can learn a different way of driving. I
Mhm.
think the danger is not in won't be able to make a maneuver. I think the danger is people are going to start making weird maneuvers or do things erratically because of the speed of the vehicle. They're gonna pop out when they shouldn't have because they didn't anticipate in advance. So it is more of a people problem, I think, than a vehicle
Mhm.
problem. but
But it's
the
like,
vehicle
yeah.
makes up for some of our people issues more often than not these
If
days.
you're on the Autobahn or the Autostrada in Europe, there are incredibly low-powered vehicles that are still getting on the Autobahn, and they're not
Mhm.
getting somehow plowed over by a Porsche. People have this assumption that because you can't accelerate 0 to 60 in 5 seconds that you're gonna get hit from behind. The
Right.
reality is, I don't know anybody that gets to a freeway on-ramp, even if there's a
Yeah.
metering light turns green, and then they floor it because
Punch
they
it.
immediately need to get up some other speed, right? Most of the
Yeah,
time, it's a pretty leisurely entry onto the highway.
that's true.
So most plug-in hybrids, a lot of people that will say these things, and then they have a plug-in hybrid like a Kia Niro plug-in hybrid or something like that. I'm like, well, you realize your Niro in EV mode is like 0 to 60 in 20 seconds, right? I'm like,
Right.
oh, I don't know. But I have it there if I need it. It's like, okay, sure. But if you're in EV mode and then you suddenly decide you don't want to be in EV mode, it does take a while to,
Yeah,
get
there's a
things
transition
get things
there.
rolling, right? So, that's the important thing to take away there, I would say.
I will say I saw something at the show that was exceptionally fast looking, and it's called a concept right now, and it probably is going to stay a concept. It was the Corvette, was it the CX1,
Mm-hmm.
CXR that looked fantastically like Koenigsegg from a few years back. Once Corvette went mid-engine, they went with a very different personality, and
Mm-hmm.
I I feel like I kind of miss the front engine rear wheel drive layout and some of the proportions that came with it. I've been duped too many times where I go, oh, is that a Ferrari or a McLaren? And no, it's just a Corvette. Which props to Corvette. It's a fantastic looking machine, and it does at a glance look like a lot of other products out there. But I don't know. It almost feels less distinct in that way. There's nothing
Hmm.
left on the market that has those body proportions of the last generation. Certainly not this concept.
Yeah. I think it was the right move for GM though, because if if they had stayed front engine, then why not just get a Mustang? Why that was always
Sure.
sort of the quote unquote problem with it
Mhm.
was, Corvette was a little lighter weight, more powerful than Camaro, but really Camaro was a better value. And
Mm.
some Camaros handled better than some Corvettes, and some
Corvettes, yeah.
Camaros were faster than some Corvettes, and some Mustangs were better and faster and whatever, right? And so, but by making it mid-engine, you've completely separated that group of similarly priced vehicles, and I think that was the real
Mhm.
win there, is that it's supercar in format, but not supercar in price. If we're talking about the ones that you could actually go to the dealer and buy tomorrow, like you
Right,
could run out and buy a Corvette tomorrow for only about 40% more than the average new car in America. It's a pretty
right.
strangely good deal, right? And you could have an exotic platformed vehicle that shares incredibly little with any other GM car. Also, kind
Yeah.
of the other complaint with Corvettes was it's a little bit too much shared here and there by the time the last front engine model rolled off the line, right? But
What?
now,
No.
now we've gone mid engine, and now it
Mhm.
doesn't really share an enormous amount with any other GM product.
No, and I don't hate that this is the direction they went, and I agree with you there. It's just sort of a, oh, yeah, I do miss that Corvette of old. Not let's get rid of this thing. And they
Hmm.
do need to further differentiate. I agree. But it always sat in a weird spot. The Dodge Viper was Corvette-ish,
Hmm.
but in a league of its own, right? It was not
Yes.
only more expensive, but also more powerful, and that one a little bit more dangerous. It wasn't shot for shot. Not a muscle car, not but not a full exotic, and I don't
Yeah,
know.
Viper
I
Viper
like what
was
the Corvette's
just
doing, but I miss the
Viper
old one a
was
little bit.
just dumb. Let's put it this way. If you ever get the chance to drive one, they are an insane handful. The especially the first generation. The first generation, wow, those are out to kill you. Like
That's what I've heard.
it
Yeah, I
is
have
it
not
is
been behind the wheel
insane.
of one, so I've heard that
Yeah.
check your life insurance policy before you
Too
drive.
too much power, manual transmission, not a lot of electronic nannies. The
Mhm.
first one barely had anything as far as
Right.
electronics on it. And coupled with the manual transmission means that a slight misshift can really get things squirrely in a corner. Like, whew, They were a hard thing to control. Even professional drivers in the later ones. I remember at some Viper Drive event I was at, they had a professional driver drive us around, and that is the only time I've ever been in one of these, situations where they're like, "Oh, do a hot lap with the pro driver, it'll be fun, whatever," where spinning was considered like an oopsie, but also totally normal. And
Yeah, it's gonna
so,
happen.
I mean, he got a little squirrely out of a corner and we started spinning and he's just like, "Oh, oops." And I'm like, "Oh shit, oops is not what I want to hear
What do you mean, oops?
when I'm a passenger in a car. I don't care who's driving. Oops is not something I want to hear."
That's like taking off in the jet and the you're getting a notification from the pilot and they're just saying, "Hey everyone, thanks for flying about." Oh, what's that? That's not
Yeah.
not the things you want to hear.
We just glued the wing back on. No big deal.
Mm-hmm. Had a little bit of maintenance. If you
Yeah.
see any tape flapping in the wind, probably not an issue. I wouldn't worry too much
Hmm,
about it.
hmm.
If you see it go in the engine, though, go ahead and hit that blue light just above you.
Yeah. So, definitely a handful there. But what is
Yeah.
an interesting not handful apparently is the Honda Prelude. So we're going to be driving that in January.
Hmm.
But I am intrigued because we're getting a lot of reports out of Europe. I've had a lot of questions recently about Prelude and performance numbers. I've also
Hmm.
seen some awkward reporting on this. So, for instance, not to throw anybody directly under the bus, but over at the Drive, our friends at the Drive had something about, don't worry, the Prelude is going to be faster in America because we get more horsepower. We have to dispel this one because there's this
Hmm.
dude in the comment section that just wasn't getting it somehow. Honda describes their 200 to 201 horsepower hybrid system in the US that's used in CRV, in the
Or
Civic, etc. That
mhm,
2-liter hybrid system, Civic Accord, CRV, etc. They describe that as a 200 horsepower hybrid system in the US, but most other markets outside the US, outside of the Americas, I should say, they seem to describe it as either a 181 horsepower or 184 PS system. So it's the other way of measuring horsepower.
mhm,
Um, there is no difference in the system. It's just that in the US, they're allowed to use a different way of describing and calculating that horsepower figure, whereas in other markets, they must use the motor's horsepower. So it's always going to be driven by a 181 horsepower motor in serial hybrid mode. And anytime you're asking the most out of the system, other than
mhm,
efficiency, if you're asking for power out of the system, that motor is the only thing moving you forward. So in a lot of markets, for truth and advertising reasons, they have to describe it as a 181 horsepower hybrid system. In the US, there is an SAE definition for hybrid horsepower that Honda had a hand in crafting, mind you,
mhm.
and along with other car companies. Honda was not alone. But
Yeah, yeah.
that description allows them to call it a 200 horsepower hybrid system because there is theoretically a moment where the battery can put out this much power and the engine can put out that much power, yada yada yada, and you could that totals 200, but out of that only 181 is actually driving the car forward because that motor is only 181 horsepower. So
Right.
that's the tricky bit there. The bottom line is that Prelude is probably not going to be appreciably faster here than it is in Europe.
And I've mentioned this before. I am intrigued and curious. And they had a Prelude prototype at the Seattle Auto Show, which I was
Hmm.
very surprised by. That is a regional show, not a global, international anything. So props for the folks who made that happen because we don't get concepts, we don't get prototypes of anything. So cool to see it there. And there were a lot of people circling around it. So good for
Hmm.
them. It drew some attention. And I was talking to an older gentleman who goes, "Do you work for Honda?" I said, "No, but I know a thing or two about this." And he was so intrigued by it. And I said, "Well, it's based on the Civic platform, and it's got the Civic hybrid powertrain, but it's using the Type R suspension. And there is some cool stuff in here. It's got the driver's seat different than the
Hmm.
passenger seat, which is expensive or more expensive to do from a logistics side of things." And I said, "But those rear seats are just kind of technically there. They're cloth. No one cares." But I'm so curious to see
Hmm.
what we're expecting, what this is going to look like. And then the pricing came out here pretty recently, starting at 42,000, and that
Yep.
is really
Plus
close
destination.
plus destination. But that's three and a half thousand dollars less than you'll get again MSRP on a Civic
Hmm.
Type R. And
Yeah, that
I'm willing
that
to
for
give
me
this
is the
space.
problem.
I'm willing to give this space, but here's what it has to do. We know it's going to be way slower than the Type R, not just in your daily driving, but around any racetrack, because it's going to be heavier. It's not as dedicated for that specific purpose. Even though it's using the suspension and the brakes, it's not using the same tires. It's a 235 versus a 265. So just keep that in mind. But if it's fun to drive and it's well composed, a Type R can be a little bit jarring. And the Prelude is said to be softer, right?
Yeah.
If it can be fun to drive and still very efficient, I know it's not going to be the top fuel dragster on the whatever the back mountain road is. You're not going to win Pikes Peak with it. But if you can enjoy your drive and still get 40 plus miles per gallon, that feels like a slot where people should be interested in. But they're going to look at the horsepower, 200, and go, oh, huh. And it's going to say front wheel drive, and you go, I can get a Supra that's rear wheel drive. And I can.
mean,
There's so many different
Supra's
ways.
dying on the vine here.
Yeah,
I think the pricing is the problem, and the fact that they're going to be limiting production. So I think if it was $35,000 or $36,000, so closer to SI, more expensive than SI, but closer to SI, it would make a lot more sense for me. It's so close to Type R, and its production is going to be limited like the Type R, that I'm concerned that I will be less excited about it. I think the car itself is going to be fine, and I like the look. I like the interior. I always said when we were driving the Civic Hybrid, actually, that you stick this drivetrain in an SI, that could be all kinds of fun, right? And so that's kind of what they did. They swapped in some Type R parts. They made it a coupe, but the price tag, I think it's about $5,000 too expensive, and they're going to be building 10,000 fewer units than they should.
And so the markups are going to be an issue, and the trick there is just don't buy it. I mean, that's not a Honda problem, that's a dealer problem, but it's still going to affect the end user, so that's an issue.
Well,
here's the question I have.
I have to blame Honda there for that a little bit, though, because
the limited production,
right? Because limited production, so dealers would not be able to affect a huge markup if there was sufficient supply, and they're going to be able to because supply is restricted, and there's no rational reason that it's being restricted. They can make hundreds of thousands of those hybrid systems. They've proved that, right? So there's nothing different about that.
I think they're gauging market. That's my guess, is how's this going to go? Because if that production could go towards a Civic hatchback, or a Civic hybrid or a CRV hybrid, then that's probably where it should go, because this is going to be a lower volume car. It's a 4-seater, not a 5. It doesn't have the same storage capacity. But my issue with this is that, and I mentioned it to you earlier, is that, are we looking at another CRZ, which was the same sort of hybrid system as you had in the Civic hybrid? This one had a manual, so that was a differentiator. Not something everyone loved, but it was niche. It was interesting, but it kind of fell flat. It was a good-looking vehicle to my eye, right? It was fun and interesting, but it didn't do enough, and it costs money to develop these things. And when something that is
CRZ
interesting doesn't get picked up, it was no doubt about it.
And so that I think is the difference with Prelude, is that Prelude is going to be as fast or faster than SI, which I think is a good thing. Like that is exactly the right position it needs as far as the speed. Whether or not the buyer will accept a hybrid system, time will tell. And I don't know if we have the Ouija board to answer that question at the moment. But I will say that Honda loves the dealer markup on Type R. And so this is, I think, the problem here. Some manufacturers really dislike it when dealers mark up. Like Ford is really upset when dealers mark up their products. They complain about it. They talk publicly about it. They try and disincentivize that in the limited amount of ways that Ford can, but they definitely don't like it. Honda loves it. Honda loves when dealers put absolutely crazy markups on their products, because they think it's sort of a badge of honor in a way.
It makes it special.
That's their thought. And so we see huge markups in Type R, no interest from Honda to dissuade them from doing that. Big markups actually in like Passport, when Passport first launched, big markups at the very beginning. Of course, those fell off at the end. But I think that Prelude is being designed and produced in quantities to give it almost Type R-like markups.
And I have to admit, I'm tempted by it. I personally am tempted by it. I think it's good looking. What would what would draw me away from it is if it wasn't interesting enough or different enough than a Civic Hybrid. Because if you get inside and you're driving and, interior volume and, I don't know, fit and finish, driving dynamics, if it feels too much like a Civic, that's going to be a draw away. But it's good looking. And
Mhm.
I think not only are we losing two-door vehicles, I think we're losing well-designed, interesting looking cars. It's cheaper to design something that's a little bit more mundane, not as many curves or edges, and I'm worried this will just get dropped by the wayside until there's a performance version or whatever that could look like.
I'm gonna go ahead and guess there probably is no Prelude Type R coming.
No,
They
it's a
could
whole
do
new
it.
hybrid system, or they
Right.
ditch the hybrid.
Right. It's like there's no mechanical reason they could not jam Type R's four-cylinder engine under the hood of the Prelude. Clearly, it would fit. It's a Civic platform vehicle. It has the front suspension components, etc. It would clearly fit in there. I just don't think Honda is interested in that at this point in time, with the
No.
limited resources they have for design and development. Um, Speaking of design and development, moving along, I did have an email sent to us here asking about why is it that Tesla seems to be doing so poorly in German annual inspections? There was a new news article out today saying that if you didn't know, Germany has a pretty thorough, sort of an internationally famously thorough annual inspection for their cars for roadworthiness, where
Mm.
they inspect all manner of things: suspension components, brakes, underbodies for rust, etc. One of the kind of reasons that even though Germany is a snowy country, in some ways they're sort of the California car, if you will, of
Mhm.
Europe, unless we're talking about like the ones that have been baking down in Sicily where it never rains or, rains infrequently. Because the Germans inspect on a regular basis. But I also kind of wonder if this is not truly a tale of Tesla having defective engineering, et cetera, because apparently their suspension components, ball joints, rust worthiness, etc., is a concern in the German inspection. Apparently, Tesla performs the worst of all major auto brands in Germany's inspection routines.
Okay.
Failure rates for the annual inspection are, I think, 4 or 5 times higher than the next closest model, so significantly higher.
Yeah.
They're failing on some of these corrosion, and we have heard things about Teslas having broken control arms, things like that, because
Mhm.
some of the components have been lightweighted away, etc. But I honestly wonder if instead of seeing this as some sort of flaw, as far as the American market parallel goes, I wonder honestly how many American manufactured and designed cars, primarily for this market, would
Mhm.
fare similarly there. Because when you think about this, if you're designing a car for the EU market, it's going to be going through the annual inspection in Germany. You know that they're going to be telling everybody every year who's
Mhm.
failing and who's not, and by what percentage. So you design your cars to pass, right? You don't want that badge of
Right.
dishonor. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that design wise, there's nothing fundamentally different about a Tesla in the US and Germany. So
Right.
that's probably the reality, is that you take anything made for this American market, you take F-150s, send them over there. I'm going to go ahead and guess it's probably not going to be great.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, there are obviously a lot of global vehicles out there, but we don't see a ton of global vehicles.
Hmm.
That's we are a very different market, and there are a few markets that let's say out in India you'll get much smaller vehicles, and out in China you'll get much more luxurious, minivans and those sorts of things. Like there's this weird mashup of things that don't make it here, but what's here doesn't make it over there. And I wonder if it's just something Tesla didn't think about, or they just weren't that worried about. They said, okay, that's not our primary market. If it fails more, does that mean it's 8 out of 100, or is it from 2 out of 100? Something like that. Not that it's not 4 to 5 times more, but is it a significant number? And then what's the blowback? Do people say, oh, I'm not going to buy this if they're in the German market, or do they go, yeah, okay, I'll just make
Hmm.
sure I do an extra rust coating every couple of years, something like that.
Yeah, so the and if for the record here, on the rates here, they're talking about the 2026 TUV report. Approximately 9.5 million vehicles were inspected between July 2024 and 2025, and on average, 17.3% of Model Ys failed. 13% of Model 3s failed,
Okay.
versus Mini Coopers, for instance, the Mini Cooper SE, talking about electric car defect rate. These are only 2 to 3 year old vehicles. So
Mhm.
17% of Model Ys that are 2 to 3 years old failed. 3.5% of Mini Cooper SEs failed. Volkswagen ID4, ID5, 6%. Now, what is interesting in this inspection report here, and this is why the German inspection report is so intriguing to me, is on average, nationwide, 20% of German vehicles are failed on their first inspection. So they're really looking in every nook and cranny. Let me clarify that 20% figure in case I didn't make any sense. The average failure rate across all model years of registered vehicles in Germany is about 20% for all makes, models, and all years currently registered. If we're talking about 2 to 3 year old vehicles, the average failure rate is somewhere around 2 to 3%, except if you're in these Tesla models we were just talking about, where the failure rate is closer to 20%. And that's why the results were so surprising.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the other day I was driving down the road and saw a rear wheel just wobbling like
Mm-hmm.
mad. And I actually got next to the car, honked, pointed. They pulled up next to me and I said, "Hey, that's gonna fall off." Like we're talking, we're not talking about, the shock's gone or whatever. I said, "This is going to break under pressure. You're gonna be three wheeling, but there is no inspection for that, not consistently." And this person just said, "Oh, I just got a new tire." And I said, "No, no, no, this is not a tire issue. This is a bigger thing." and
This is
and
wheel coming
unfortunately,
off.
I watched them just pull right back on the freeway, and I went,
Yep.
"Okay,
Good
fingers
luck.
crossed for you." So
Uh,
it's a thing that I imagine in the US, how many of our own vehicles
hey,
would fail this inspection.
this is not surprising. I was in Sacramento not that long ago, and at a stoplight, turning left, so had a good view of both ways on the major road going through. I believe it was Watts, and there is a Sienna riding on two rims. Obviously, this had been a while, like just
Mhm.
sparking on down the road like there was no problem. Good 45, 50 miles an hour.
Mhm.
Two rims only on one side. Two tires on the driver's side, two rims the passenger side, just sparking on through. No slowing down. It's not like they were like, "Oh, something just happened. I'm looking for a place to pull over."
Right.
Nope,
That's just what it is.
just going to work. Got places to go, people to see on two rims only.
There's a point where I go, I can understand somebody's in a tough spot and they got to go to work or they lose their job. And I also
Yep.
go, boy, is that horrible for the vehicle, entirely unsafe, bad for the roads. What are our options?
But you know what was most surprising? It wasn't a Nissan Altima.
Hmm. Yeah, depending on your market. It wasn't a Charger. It wasn't.
And on that fun note, let's dive into our podcast reviews because we have a 5-star review from the iTunes.
We do, and this is from.
Apple
Oh,
Podcasts,
goodness.
I'm sorry.
Yes, and I don't think we have a name for this one, unfortunately. But favorite auto podcast, 5 stars, by far one of the most informative and user-friendly podcasts out there for automotive information regarding new cars. I'll add sometimes old cars too. Lots of good info coupled with a very listener-friendly format. One of the first, if not the first podcast I listen to in my rotation.
Yes, from thank you username that looks like my daughter typed it out on the keyboard, which I'm desperately
Mm,
trying to keep her away from at this moment, which is why she
yeah, it
looks like a
happens.
prisoner right down here in the corner.
That's why my cat's not in the room because he'd be, review bombing
Hmm.
something.
And we also have a viewer question.
Auto Buyer's Guide. This is Anthony calling from Phoenix. I have a question of how much range you should get in your electric vehicle. Currently, we have a Model Y and a Prius. I use a Prius to commute to work. I drive a Prius because it's economical. I don't drive a very expensive car just because it's for commuting. But if I was to replace it with a similar used electric car, I'm trying to think of how much range I should get in that car. The Nissan Leaf would be too little. I drive 36 miles one way to work. And in Phoenix, you also know it gets really hot here in the summer. So I noticed I took the Model Y to work a couple times, and I noticed the range it'd probably use 10% just sitting there cooling the batteries. Probably less than that. I have cabin overheat protection on. I noticed that our efficiency is much worse in the summer. We probably get 350 watt hours per mile versus 250 watt hours per mile in the winter. So much greater efficiency in winter. So if I need to accommodate for 72 miles of range plus a buffer for cranking that AC in the summer, and another buffer to account for maybe going to the grocery store after work, how much range should someone account for in their community vehicle if they need to purchase a used or older electric vehicle just to do commuting? Thanks for. Hopefully we can address this on the next podcast. Love listening to the podcast. I faithful listener every week. Always love hearing your guys' opinions and hearing what's new on the news. So yeah, thanks, Alex. Bye.
So it's a good question, and we always appreciate you asking. You can always send it in like a voice note here. You can call us or send an email to hey@autobuyersguide.com. But the question here is one that is so frustrating for me, not that it's being asked, but that it's hard to answer. And the only reason it's extra hard to answer is because people have extra concerns with EVs that are not unwarranted, but they don't think twice about it in their gas car. Depending on the season that you're driving, your gas car gets different miles per gallon. And you might notice, but you're never worried about it. So here's the thing you need to know about an EV is that every sticker has one number. And that's already different than you find on every gas car or every hybrid, because they'll have two numbers, a city and a highway. And an EV just says you'll get fill in the blank 230 miles of range. But what you got to understand is that 230 is your city and highway combined. And just like most other cars, there's going to be a split. But differently than regular gas cars, it's the city that is always higher by a significant margin than your highway, because there are no extra gears. If you want to go faster, it's just more and more and more electricity. So
Aero plays that big deal, of course.
Yep. And at the speed, the arrow is just it's amplified. So if you're looking at a number that says 230 miles, I would immediately assume if you're driving around town all day, I would go 260 around town all day and 200 miles out on the freeway. You immediately have to deduct, I don't know, a safe number is 15, maybe 20%, especially if you're trying to be extra safe. And that's before you factor in temperature. Now, the thing here is that he mentions that it's way less efficient in the summer. I think that is going to be sort of a Phoenix issue than it is going to be across the board, because by and large, winter is when you're going to see a more significant impact. But his winter is probably more my summer as far as temperature goes. And so there isn't a whole lot of actually having to heat anything else. It's just obviously not cranking the AC. So, there was mention of a Nissan Leaf. Well, a used Leaf, a Generation 1 wouldn't work, but even a Generation 2 or certainly a brand new one would be just fine. He mentioned the Tesla has cabin overheat protection, which I think is great. It means your cabin's never getting 150, 170 degrees, but of course it's going to be using energy while you're not driving it. So that is something to factor in. But I just wish it was easier for folks to go to a dealer and say, how far is this going to take me at 70 miles an hour? And we don't have a standardized answer.
There are, of course, tests. You can look at some of the outlets like Edmunds that does a 70-mile-an-hour range test. We talk about range in the general mixed use case scenario. But in our video reviews, we always put the EPA highway number in our videos as well. So that's always a good thing to look at. And the other way to look at range, and I think the most critical way to look at it for me, is if I'm recommending an EV to someone, you should take the EPA combined range figure on most EVs and cut it in half. And if your daily driving is under that limit, you should be fine. And if your occasional use case is over, then you should be okay within certain confines. Now, the reason for the 50% is you're only really going to be using 70% of the battery on a regular basis in most EVs. Most EVs recommend that you only charge to 80%. There are some exceptions out there depending on the battery chemistry, but generally speaking, you're daily charging to 80%, and you're not discharging below 10% for battery life. And the reality that when you get down to 10%, you're probably going to start having a heart attack trying to find a charger. And so you want to be able to find one, right? So you're looking at using only 70% of your battery to begin with, and then take an extra 20% off of there for extremes, hot extremes, cold extremes, or just the dull roar that can happen on a regular basis, and the fact that your battery will degrade over time. How much it degrades over time is going to depend on the way the battery is used by the vehicle, by the way you drive, how you're charging it, the weather in your area. All those factors go into how long your battery will last and what kind of lifetime you get. But you should expect to see, in the average ownership cycle, 7 to 10 years, you should expect, 5 to 6% of your battery at least to degrade. So you want to, have a nice buffer baked in there from the very beginning. Most modern EVs that are sold here, actually every EV that's sold in the US now, now that the Leafs are completely renovated, has liquid cooled battery pack, a climate controlled battery pack. They're cooled, they're heated, and that really plays big into battery degradation. I know that in the beginning times of EVs, back in the 2010s, we did see really rapid, like shockingly rapid degradation in Leaf batteries because they're just right there under the vehicle being baked in Phoenix all the time. You pull into a hot asphalt parking lot, you get all this radiant energy back up there into the battery. The battery is already 130, 140 degrees. It's just there in an oven all day long, right? And in fact, kind of funny story. I had a really good friend that bought a Leaf, one of the first generation Leafs, because he was like, "Hey, this is gonna be great. I can charge at home, and I can really reduce my cost of operation." But he was driving kind of a long ways in Phoenix, and he was in Phoenix. And initially, his job had covered parking with charging at the office. He then was transferred to a different building where they didn't have covered parking, and they didn't have charging at the office. So now he's at the point where he is round tripping right on the fumes of electrons when he gets home. And so then he starts noticing, hey, I can't make it actually all the way home. So then he starts stopping to DC fast charge and stopping to DC fast charge and stopping to DC fast charge. And back then the Leaf had the little tree icon for battery health, and he noticed his tree was looking pretty scary.
Losing some leaves.
Yeah, and we called, and he's like, my God, my Leaf is now down to like 45 or 50 miles of range. What's going on? And I'm like, I hate to tell you, but it sounds like it's kind of what you should expect or should have expected based on what you're doing. If you're daily using 100% of your vehicle's battery capacity, and that battery is not actively cooled, and you're fast charging it and 100-degree weather all the time, you can expect some really bad things out of batteries, which is thankfully why we don't do that to EVs anymore.
Right. Now, I do still think a Nissan Leaf is the best first car for a new driver. You get them one of the Generation 1, whether it's got a refurbished battery or not. You don't need to go more than 50 miles to and from school or baseball practice or whatever. It teaches discipline. It's really inexpensive to own and operate. And they're fun. They're cute.
As long as it's only like $1,000. If you're buying your kid the $1,000 car, sure. If you're spending, if you're spending more than used Prius money on your used Leaf, I would
I'd say 3 to 5. 3 to 5,000 seems just fine to me.
Just say no. Just say no. Go get a used Prius. They could take the Prius with them to college. That Leaf
Prius will have 250,000 miles on it.
Yeah, but getting that Leaf to college, you might as well just ship it. And at that point, why would you ship a Leaf anywhere?
Yeah, that's fair. But thankfully we have that new Leaf. So
yeah, it's a good thing we have the new Leaf, because old Leaves, they belong in the compost pile.
Yeah. Okay.
But the new Leaf, I think the new Leaf is all kinds of fantastic, actually.
Well, and going around the auto show, I was looking at what are the affordable EVs, and there are still a few of them out there. Kona EV is one of them, but it's on the more expensive end of this budget segment, and it comes down to the least expensive EV you can buy right now is a Chevy Bolt, but for not that much more, you can get a Leaf, and that's exactly what I would do.
Although by the time Bolt is actually on sale, it looks like the actual cheap Leaf is going to be on sale as well, and it will be the cheapest again.
That's true.
And that one is the one I really want to drive. I want to drive a base Leaf because Nissan did not remove as much from that as I thought they would. I had somehow assumed they would really cut to the bone and ditch adaptive cruise control, give you one teeny tiny LCD, etc. The cuts they made are actually really minor. It has still the 2-screen setup. I mean, they're smaller screens, but they're still 12 inches each, right? It still has adaptive cruise control. You get 4 speakers, so it's like, okay, so four crappy speakers, and a little bit less power. But all in all, it seems like a strangely good deal.
Now we're talking the S Plus?
No, the S.
The S, okay, because
The
the
S
S was a
without the
smaller
plus.
battery.
Yes.
Yeah, the 52 kilowatt hour battery. Yeah.
So it is an interesting time. And of course, they're not saying it's going to be limited production. We don't know exactly how long this new Bolt is going to hang on. But they also said that there are going to be some basically Bolt family-esque priced vehicles in GM's line. So it's not
Yeah,
just going to be orphaned.
I have questions. They'll be answered in the in the future. I do know that one GM product that was that I suggested, hey, it'd be a fun thing for the channel, and you said probably not. That is on its way out, not surviving in the short term or the long term. Is that BrightDrop? And you found a fantastic deal on one. I said, why not? It's battery, it's space. That ended up being cheaper than a Bolt.
That's true. There are BrightDrops out there that are in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. If for people that don't know what on earth a BrightDrop is, it is the dumbest name ever that GM could have decided to stick on an electric van.
It is.
And it was a brand to begin with because for some reason GM was like, hey, let's make an electric van and let's not call it a Chevy or a GMC. Let's call it a BrightDrop.
It's a BrightDrop.
Yeah, but at any rate, made total sense. Brand new body, brand new design, etc. Designed to compete
Attractive.
Yeah, actually, I thought they're pretty decent. Designed to compete with the Rivian vans that that Amazon's using, etc. The biggest failure point to me, I think, in BrightDrop was, well, two failure points. One, they should have just called it a Chevy and sold it at Chevy dealers. And two, they should also have made a hybrid or a gasoline version of this thing. Because the format of it is really, frankly, fantastic for a lot of commercial users. The cargo area is enormous. The payload capacity is fantastic. It's very upright, very square. It has, a bunch of different options on the inside, but the coolest of which is a roller door in the back. So, that kind of bigger moving van style roller door is very practical for a lot
I
of...
was already seeing camper conversions for it.
But a lot of delivery companies, carpet cleaning companies, maintenance companies, any kind of thing where you need to move around a lot of stuff and you want to be able to get your employee in there, stand up, equipment racks or whatever, like the access is fantastic. And a lot of companies that are using these in commercial services, there's simply the one man in a van kind of thing. And some of these companies have concerns about, well, I don't really want my employees driving people on occasion in the vehicle. So I know, because I've helped companies consult in the past, that were like, can we delete the front seat legally in a vehicle to make sure that there's no passenger riding in the car that they don't want? And of course, these things have the one funky seat in the front. And if you want a second seat, they got this weird little jump seat on the side. I think a really excellent format, and they're front wheel drive, which is kind of quirky and interesting, but it gives it a really low load floor in the back. So missed opportunities. That's the part that does blow my mind. For all that they spent on this BrightDrop thing, I would be intrigued to see what GM could do in a backwards conversion. We've seen so many gas vehicles converted to electrified vehicles. I want to see someone take a BrightDrop and go backwards in a production format.
It just feels like, and BrightDrop's been around for like 2 years, maybe 3, something like that. And it's all this production, all this R&D, all of these components, and now they go, now we're going to shut it down, when Amazon has only opened up their delivery vans to a wider market. So I go, GM, what are you doing? Where's the opportunity there? Because again, it was pretty affordable. If you didn't need the biggest battery or the tallest version of it, if you look at your fleet operating costs, that just drops, exponentially.
And this is the part where I'm doubly sad, because for people out there that are not in the fleet world, GM's claim to fame, well, and Ford's as well, and the reason that they're used by fleets so much is that the fleet discounts are fantastic. So you go and you buy. Typically, with most companies, it's between 10 and 25 units to start to get a fleet discount. And the pricing then starts dropping through the floor. If you're, for instance, a Nissan customer, the discounts are pretty inexpensive. It starts something like $250 off for their standard fleet program for low volume. Obviously escalates up from there. And like Hertz is getting, fantastic pricing on everything. But for their bigger vans, it starts at like $250 to $1,000 off of the van if you buy enough in volume. With General Motors, it pretty rapidly gets into the 5 digits. So you're getting thousands of dollars off, tens of thousands of dollars off on some vehicles. So the BrightDrops were really, really inexpensive compared to the Sprinter electric van, the Rivian electric van. The Ford electric van, I don't know where their pricing is exactly, but you could bet also similarly cheap, which is why we see those Ford Transit electrics out there. But I am just surprised that, given the age of the Chevy Express, that there wasn't some natural thought process of like, let's save some of our R&D money here, gasify this thing, and kick it on for a while as a electric express, bright
and
express.
Even BrightDrop can go away, but the vehicle shouldn't. Even in a world where the transition to EVs and fleets being penalized if they don't, those sorts of things, even though that's going away, it doesn't change that the EV cost is lower. It doesn't mean that in a few years that can't change direction. So just shutting the whole thing down, it doesn't mean they can't spin it up in 3 years. So I mean, I guess there's an operational side where they go, yeah, it doesn't make sense to just keep it going now, but I can't imagine it's too hard on the the bottom line. Just keep it.
The waste of all that R&D expense is what blows my mind there, because it was not cheap to develop the BrightDrop. Sure,
No.
the motors and the battery modules are common with other Ultium family vehicles. Sorry for the bell jingling. Elizabeth has suddenly decided she just wants to like shake her duck all the time here.
She's got things about it too.
You go ahead and do that. That's fine. But but it's like the waste of that without trying to parlay it into something different just is what blows my mind. But GM has the budget for these things, and I guess they thought they couldn't shift it to some other market. It would be a pretty big thing to drive around Europe, but in countries that are more interested in electrification, I'm somewhat surprised they didn't try and make a broader push to shove it in those markets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll tell you what though, and just going a different direction. When we talk about R&D and money and options and variety of powertrains, right now I think my crown has to go to Stellantis, because I read the article the other day. Here it comes. The Durango is getting the V6 back, the never dying, ever living, forever there Pentastar is making its way back into a vehicle that is continuing to exist as it does.
Yeah. And it looks like it might have its best third quarter ever, I think, in sales, is what I was hearing there. We'll have to wait and see what all the numbers turn out to be there. But it is looking like it is selling strangely well, especially when you look at that sales list of 3-row SUVs. It's not at the bottom. It's like in the lower half of sales volume, but not at the bottom for sure. And it is by far the oldest. So it is printing the most cash because that design has been paid off, I don't know, before anybody even thought of redesigning the Pilot twice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's chilling. But it got me thinking that Stellantis, again, the big parent, but Stellantis has so many different engine options, and they've gone so many different directions. So we talk about R&D, we had to say goodbye to the Hemi, and they were replaced with a Hurricane engine, but not 1, 2. We get a standard output and a high output, which we've driven them in multiple vehicles. And I think we both really enjoy what that engine is. The limitation is towing when you're looking at your engine braking, but beyond that, fantastic engine. The Pentastar is still there. We are replacing a outgoing 4-cylinder turbo with a new Hurricane turbo. So same size, but a very, very different engine construction. Really complex looking, and there are some questions about longevity there, but here's a new Hurricane product. Oh, but wait, don't worry, we're bringing back the V8. The Hemi's here, and at the same time, we've pushed off, but still plan and announced in a new product. So the Reeve, which they've changed the name multiple times. It was the E-Rev. Now it's the Reeve. They'll change it again, but it's the plug-in hybrid variant with a huge battery. It was supposed to come out in the Ram Charger, which is now the Rev, because the Rev is dead. So the Ram Charger takes its place. And now we're going to see it in the Grand Wagoneer. So there are just a swath of options here. It's mind-boggling to me.
Although, to be honest, I mean, they have fewer engines and engine families than Ford or GM does on the North American side of things. That Pentastar, lived in everything. That was one of the highest volume engines in North America. Has actually proved pretty reliable. So I'm not too surprised it came back in the Durango. And of course, it's going to live on in the extended range EVs. It's that same basic Pentastar design with some different cycle tweaks to make it a bit more efficient. But you know, engine family merging is basically the end game right now, trying to reduce complexity and reduce options. It's what every manufacturer has been trying to do, trying to really narrow down those options for cost savings. I am casually interested to see what a next generation Durango looks like, because the reports have been so all over the map that no one really knows. We know that Grand Cherokee, oddly enough, currently is not related to Wagoneer S or Recon or Cherokee, but the next Grand Cherokee will be on that same STLA large platform as Charger, as all that jazz. So expect more sharing there. And of course, expect 3-row Grand Cherokee to get in there on the action too. The question sort of is, will Durango turn into a full-size body-on-frame SUV, or will they stay a mid-size unibody SUV? And there are rumors in both directions. So I'm casually intrigued to see where they go, because I like the size and the format of it as it is now. And I don't know, it's like, does modernizing it actually change the interest set and the reason people buy it? Is the age actually a feature, not a bug?
Yeah, and I guess the next generation, how does that line up? I imagine quite a bit with the rumored Ram SUV that is supposedly on its way. That's one of those things where, yeah, obviously those two are going to have some things in common. It would be silly not to, but we've also seen sillier. So I don't know. Has it lived a long life?
Rumors that I've heard indicate that the Ram SUV, which would make more sense, the Ram SUV would be most likely body on frame. So think of it as ramified Wagoneer. That seems to make more sense to me. And the Dodge one might then have the ability to stay unibody, rear-wheel drive, performance-oriented something. The sad part is that there had also been rumors that Dodge would create a smaller rear-wheel drive, high-performance thing, which just has not happened. Because how cool would it be if there was like a, I don't know, BMW X3 sized Dodge thing that was rear-wheel drive and had that 550 horsepower Hurricane in it? That would be hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, the Hornet could always go a very different direction in the future. You know.
Hornet seems fine. Tariffs obviously sucked because it's not built in the US. It's a little on the pricey side, but it's like, it's okay. It's fine.
Well, price to MSRP, remember, there are going to be some deep discounts on those as well.
There are. But, you know, in the before times where it got tax credits for, on leases only, mind you, for the plug-in hybrid, then that made sense. But I think as it is now, Hornet's not making a whole lot of sense to anybody. Now's the time to just, maybe we take a old Alpha platform or some new Alpha platform and start building it in the US so that we don't have to worry about tariffs, but rear-wheel drive, inline six, that could be fun. The question always with them is just sort of, when is Stellantis going to spend the huge amount of money they have in the bank on something? Because they do have a lot of cash on hand. They just aren't seemingly doing anything with it.
Right. Where is it going, and when is that happening?
Yeah, other than stock buybacks.
That's true. And I've seen more products pushed back than I have seen new products announced, basically, in the last couple of years. So I don't know. And when is there going to be another Chrysler?
Or is Stellantis just going to merge with Honda and create an even stranger conglomerate than already exists?
That's an interesting question. Why Honda?
Because they're the ones, they're a small company. They've had weird, you know, mixed products before. Just to imagine these GM collaborations that are finally over now. But Honda also kind of struggles with a lot of older products and older platforms. And what are we going to do here? But they're also an interesting car company that produces fun products. I don't know. There's a future there that Mitsubishi does not have.
No, that's true. But Mitsubishi's still pretty tied in with Nissan, especially with the announcement of the new Rogue plug-in hybrid, the all-new, brand new, very exciting Rogue plug-in hybrid, which suspiciously looks like our old Outlander.
Yes. This is the first time I've ever seen a car company rebadge a product and then rebadge a product. So for those that don't know, Nissan is finally getting the long rumored and long awaited plug-in hybrid Rogue, except that it is a Mitsubishi Outlander with a Nissan logo on it. And the Outlander is not quite a Rogue with a Mitsubishi logo on it. It's a Rogue that had a little bit of time to change, maybe had some plastic surgery. Got a new bumper, some tweaks here and there, but the Rogue plug-in hybrid is literally just an Outlander with a black grille and the logo. So it's getting the Mitsubishi plug-in hybrid system, not Nissan's plug-in hybrid systems that they have in other world markets. That makes no sense to me.
Right. And the Outlander has such a identifiable front end. I don't know exactly what you would or could do, but I feel like it wouldn't take a whole lot of time, energy, or effort to swap out a different headlight design. I know Nissan is being very careful with their cash right now.
They could have stuck the Nissan bumpers on it at least.
Yeah, like I'm saying, like I know Nissan's being careful with their cash, and they need to, and that makes sense. But why not differentiate it a little bit, especially when you know that Outlander front end is not universally loved? I don't have a problem with it, but I know not everyone is down for it. So why not go a different direction? Just slightly, just slightly. We have a lot of we've had a whole podcast on talking about badge engineering, and you go, well, how much of this, how much is borrowed, and you go, oh, these are the same thing. Yeah, but even something like a Toyota 86 and a Subaru BRZ have a different front bumper.
Yeah. The other problem, though, is that no substantive changes have been made to the hybrid system. So you're still going to be getting 26 miles per gallon EPA operating as a hybrid, which is now dramatically below RAV4. But you do get the tiny third row, which I think is all kinds of fantastic. So that's a win there. And you get 33 miles of electric range, which is decently behind the RAV4 as well.
Yeah.
Price tag wise, it's going to be right in there with RAV4. And now Toyota is promising to build a lot more RAV4 plug-in hybrids. So, I think that it's a product that is great to have, but it would have been even better to have had 10 years ago when there was less competition. And now with that competition, I'm just not sure too much stands out other than that tiny third row.
And I'm not saying that there isn't an argument for this Rogue Outlander situation versus something like a Kia Sorento. Price is going to be a big one, right? Because the Sorento has a plug-in hybrid option. It does drive very differently, where it drives more as a hybrid than an EV with an extender. And I actually like that about the Outlander. It's just the consistency of the driving experience. But obviously there's some efficiency issues that come along with it. But you'll be able to get a good deal on it. And if you can, I really enjoyed our old Outlander. I know it wasn't perfect, but the interior was much nicer than I thought it would be. But
it was comfortable.
It
its
looks
relative efficiency always offended me, is the problem.
Yeah.
Every time I filled it up with gasoline or electricity, I kept telling myself, like, it's weird that in either of these instances, a RAV4 would be so much less expensive to operate. Like, on electricity or on gasoline, doesn't matter what you do, the RAV4 is going to be less expensive to operate. That kept hitting me every single time.
Not just people, but stuff. And that's a huge prop in that direction, is that this Outlander Rogue does have a lot of usable space.
In fact, actually, pretty much everything that it competes with, other than a Mazda, is going to be cheaper to keep around on gasoline or electricity. So that's kind of a bummer. And with that, we probably ought to end the episode. So thanks for listening or watching, everybody. Be sure and find us on the related channels. You can always send us the voice memos to hey@autobuyersguide.com, or give us a jingle on the old-fashioned telephone, 669-842-1947. See everybody later.